Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone received the agenda packet from our clerk, Kelly Weston, and the information provided and has had time to review it. I will call the special meeting of the Executive Board of Centralina Regional Council. Call the meeting to order, and I will ask if you will please follow along. We do this every meeting. That will be in virtual for quite some time. To help us move through the agenda efficiently, please remain muted except when making a motion, a second, voting, or posing a question or comment. Be sure to state your name for the record when making a motion, a second, or when speaking. You are monitoring attendance as board members have joined the Zoom. In the interest of time, we will not call the names of board members participating via computer, since your names were recorded when you logged into the meeting and are displayed in the participant list. Kelly will call the names of board members whose names are not shown on the participant list. Names will be called in alphabetical order by last name. I'll now ask our clerk to call the roll.
Peter Asciuto, Dolores Chambers, Kathy Davis, Larkin Eggleston, Bill Feather, Jean Halp.
Present. Jean is here.
Thank you. Bob Hobus, Corinthia Lewis Lemon, Pedro Mori, Christine Poinsett, David Williams, all right, Mr. Chairman, I'm just confirming that we'll have quorum. I can give you the thumbs up once I've got that confirmed.
Thank you.
If you'd like to move on.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. While Kelly's confirming whether they have a quorum or not, regardless, this meeting is for information only. No votes will be taken tonight, information only. So while we're waiting to hear that, I will now call for a moment of silence. Please join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. With no amendments to the agenda, we'll move on to the only item on our agenda. Item 1, Centralina Office Space Options Presentation. I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, Geraldine Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Kelly, when you have a moment, if you could move on to the next slide. I really appreciate everyone joining us for the special meeting. I know we have only 2 months of the year when you don't meet, and we try to protect those time off months for you as much as possible, given your many commitments. But given the importance of this process and this decision, we felt it's important, given the high interest that the executive board had in the topic at the June meeting, spend a little bit more time walking you through some of the options that are being considered, so that we are all equipped to make a decision at your next executive board meeting in September. So this is a time-sensitive process, and it's a deadline-driven process, which is why we're taking the time to make sure you have the emerging information as it's available to you. Kelly, could you go 2 slides forward, please? So the purpose of the meeting this evening is to inform you of our progress. We're going to provide you with some key facts and emerging observations on 2 of the 3 sites that we're considering. We're also, of course, considering our current office space, and there is a 4th option that's emerging that we'll get into in a little bit more detail but that's not quite ripe for sharing this evening. We want to field your questions and make sure we get your input. If there are questions or concerns or pieces of information you might need to make a decision in September, it's important that you share that with us tonight so that we can prepare accordingly. So as a reminder, we're not making any decisions tonight. This is purely informational. So I'm going to start off with a brief recap of our process. I'm going to turn it to our partners at Cushman & Wakefield, Keith Bell and Piers Waits, to review our candidate sites. During that time, you'll also hear from members of our staff committee on some of their observations from the site tour that we did. And then we'll wrap up with a financial overview of our process so far in the negotiations and talk about some next steps. Next slide. So just want to start off briefly with an overview of what are we looking for? What are our goals with this office space search? And this list is informed by a staff survey that we completed in June. That was part of our staff engagement. But really, we're looking for a long-term and cost-effective home. So we're looking at a 5 to 7 year lease. It's important that we are in a facility that's inviting, that's well-maintained and professional looking. This includes having a building that has on-site maintenance and janitorial. It seems kind of like a no-brainer, but it's something that's important. And we also want a building owner that has an approach to continuing to invest in the building and their asset. We are only looking in the university area, so we're not moving more. If we move, we won't move more than a mile from our current location, so it's easily accessible. On the other side of the screen, you see a list of some of the attributes of the workspace that we're looking for. It's really important to me that our staff who work so hard have a high quality environment when they're in the office to work from, that it's inspiring, that it's comfortable, that it's flexible, and that it's well equipped. So these bullets here really reflect staff's desire as well as mine. Next slide. So a brief recap of the process. We started this engagement with Cushman & Wakefield back in December. They've worked with Centralina over the last few moves. So Keith personally has been at our side for many years in this process. So they're a trusted partner. And over the last several months, we've gone through an iterative process of evaluating the available properties and our parameters, looking at those sites, test fitting the program, our physical square footage, will it fit in those options? We've received some initial offers from those landlords in terms of what the package would be and the financials. And we've also looked at what the cost would be to bring those spaces up to our needs in terms of construction. Our process is not over. We will continue to negotiate this summer, and we'll finalize our recommendation to the board, which will be presented to you for a decision on September 9th. The big milestone to be aware of is that in our current lease, we are required to provide notice if we're staying or if we're going by September 30th. So this is an important point in the process to make sure we meet that milestone. Next slide. In terms of decision-making, the flow of this will be, I'm looking to our directors and our staff committee to give me feedback, to give me advice. I'll use that to prepare a recommendation to you, and the ultimate decision lies with the executive board. Three of the factors that I'm weighing in looking at these options are the complete cost, so not just the rent, but the cost of the upfit, the furniture we'll need, the moving costs or not, and over time, how much will it cost us? So how much does the rent increase each year? What's the total financial package of incentives and costs that are being considered for each site? What are our organizational needs, both in the short and the long term, as well as the quality of environment? Next slide. So staff engagement is really critical to this process. It's been a pillar of past moves by the organization, and very important this time around as well. So in addition to engaging our staff through updates, we did a survey in June, and we've also formed a staff committee. And our staff who are on the committee, I believe all of them are on the line tonight. And I just want to recognize them, and maybe they can wave their hand or give a thumbs up so that the executive board knows that they're on the committee. They're doing this in addition to their regular duties. So I really appreciate the time that they're taking to represent their departments and contribute to the process. And I take their feedback very seriously. We did a tour with the committee as well as our officers earlier this month. And then, of course, we'll be seeking out advice and feedback throughout the process. If you could go on to the next slide, Kelly. That concludes just the overview. And now we're going to dive deeper into the sites that are under consideration. You're going to hear from Keith and Piers from Cushman and Wakefield, and also Emily Parker from our staff committee and Latasha Walker from our staff committee will be providing some initial impressions. We're going to walk you through each site so that you have the opportunity just to kind of get a complete picture. And to start us off, I'm going to turn it over to Keith.
Geraldine, thank you for that. Can you hear me okay?
Ken.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for giving us the opportunity to talk to you. Let me just say, as a group, you're very fortunate to have the leadership that you have. They've been very, very due diligent. They've checked every boxes. They've asked all the right questions, and they've been very, very thorough. So of all the clients I work with, I've been very impressed with your leadership and their due diligence. Y'all should be impressive. In regards to the site in general, I think she mentioned about university area. I think that throws a lot of pros in your corner for a certain point. Right now, the university area has the lowest rental rates in the market. If we were looking anywhere else, it'd probably be more expensive, and there happen to be more options in the university area. So there's a lot of reasons this area works for you all. Not only physically for commutes, but cost-wise, it makes sense as well. So we took that program, we looked out through all the university, we actually stretched all the way to 77, we did some areas, and based on your space needs, the type of building, all the needs, we basically we started with a large number, and we've slowly brought it in to a point where we've got really 4 on the table. The first one is Cliff Cameron, the Grove, which is a very professional office building. We also have the David Taylor Drive location, which is Resource Square, number 2, another blue dot there. It's a little farther south. We're looking at currently at your existing location. Obviously, we're still looking at that. And then obviously the last one we talked about that's come up is the McCullough Drive location in yellow. Next slide, please. To give you a little bit of background of all these, and this is just kind of a big scale, we're trying to figure out what is the most efficient and what makes the most sense. So we've got a little comparison here of all of these. Obviously, the square footage is a little different between your current location. That's where we had your current location. There's a certain footprint. It's a little difficult to get that any smaller. We're working through that process right now to see if we can and the costs associated. But with your leadership team and the way we're working with the architects and space, we can really squeeze that square footage and get you all more efficient. And more efficient means saving money. Trying to knock rental rates down here or there a little bit, always move a little bit, but really reducing your space is the best way to save costs. So we've got the 2 options there. David Taylor and Cliff Cameron are fairly close to the same square footage. And then we're doing some space plans at the 300 McDullen. We'll bring those back up if we need to. Building amenities, that's a big positive. So what does the building or the landlord offer that is included in your rate that you might not have? And your current building, as you know, it's kind of as is, there's not much there. We've shown you 2 different buildings that have a lot different amenities that are available that really kind of open the eyes to a lot of folks on your team. In the David Taylor building, they've got a first floor conference center. It is beautiful. They built it out, high finishes, great furniture, has a small lounge. They've got a free workout center for gym for those who want to burn off the stress of meetings, along with locker rooms. They have an outdoor patio, and then they also have a little lounge food kiosk where if you want to go down there, just grab a sandwich, get and go. So it's all that is included in your rate and as an amenity. So to everybody's in those buildings. So that's a big positive. So sometimes it's good to get out of the office and go somewhere those offers it. Same with the Cliff Cameron. They have a first floor lounge as well. So they have grab and go food, a place to get away. They do not have a common building conference center. So we've kind of worked that into our space. That's the one thing that's a little different from those. When we go to parking, and parking is essential. Obviously, you have to need to have enough spaces for your team. And obviously, when you have large meetings after hours shouldn't be an area, but all these have sufficient parking that should meet your needs. That shows right there in the parking. So that's just a kind of an overview from big picture on that. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Piers.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, so the next few slides, we're going to dive into a little bit more detail on the Grove and Resource Square, since those are the two new buildings that people are perhaps less familiar with. So the Grove is located up at the intersection of Harris Boulevard and Mallard Creek Road. It's about a mile from I-85, so great access and accessibility here. And there's a couple of ins and outs to get into the park, just to help deal with the traffic light intersection there. This is the only single-story building in this park, but within the same ownership group, they have a handful of other single-story properties out the back here behind the building. So professionally run park, property management there, handle all of the buildings. And then, as you can see, also 4 stories. So, plenty
Piers,
of other
you misspoke
tenants.
there. This is the only multi-story building in the park.
Sorry, this is the only multi-story building. There are a handful of other single-story buildings in the park. So now I'm going to draw your attention up to the top right of the screen here, and we've done this for both buildings and shown what we call your programming requirement. So this shows you within the test fit below what each space can accommodate. So the key points here, I think, to draw to are workstations, which are numbered at 42 in this space, private offices at 7, and then there's a training room that is actually shown on a separate plan to this, not on this page here, but it is on the ground floor of this space. And I think that's the big thing to note between the Grove and Resource Square, is that here we've bifurcated the functions. You have your office space on one floor, and then the training center is down on the ground floor, right next to one of the entrances, just for convenient access. And that was dictated by this space only having 9,000 square feet available here, which allowed us to fit in our seating and offices, but not enough to make the training room center a part of this actual space. Next slide, please. And then there's just a couple of photos from the site tour here. I think a few key things to note. This space sits and has 3 sides of glass. It sits on the end of the building. So you have good natural light coming in from 3 different sides. And then just from a condition perspective, what you have here is ceiling grids in place. So there's some electrical, HVAC, ceiling grids, which just from a cost perspective can help over building out from a true shell condition, where you have to bring in all of those sorts of services as part of the construction build out. Next slide, please. And then here is just a photo of the amenity center that Keith touched on earlier. You can see there's a grab and go food service here, which pre-COVID and post-COVID will be fully stocked for employees when they're in the building. They have Wi-Fi here in the lounge. It's a free amenity to the building that people can come and use as a breakout space to take personal phone calls, or have meetings with team members and use it as they wish. And this is on the ground floor as well. Next slide, please.
So Piers, I'll take it from here, I think. My name is Emily Parker, and I'm happy to serve on the staff committee for this project. And I'll just kind of go over a couple of the high points that you kind of see listed here. This is committee feedback on the Grove property. You can see in the left-hand column are kind of the positive points. And then on the right column are maybe areas of concern or need for negotiation. So I'll just pull out a few that are kind of note. As Piers just noted, in the space, which is on the 3rd floor, there are 3 sides of windows. So there's a lot of windows, a lot of great natural light, which is really quite appealing. And on the other side of that coin, when you're kind of in the space, there was kind of some agreement that it felt like the ceiling seemed a little bit low, honestly, and it felt a little bit kind of maybe smaller than the space actually is, just with the ceiling height. Another big point is that, like Piers mentioned, the conference room or training room is on the first floor. So the suite's on the third floor. The meeting space, like our current Catawba room, is on the first floor. It has a great deal of potential. There's an entrance right outside of the room doors that goes out into a parking lot. So that's for decent access. One kind of detail, but maybe an important one that we found out, is that the bathroom facilities are kind of a little trek down the hallway from that meeting area. So that maybe people could get turned around. You never know, but that's kind of one point to consider. The suite space upstairs on the third floor itself is smaller than our current space, which is good for, less wasted space, reduced costs, but a concern is that might be too small and maybe kind of room for growth could be limited. In terms of location, like Piers noted, it's really pretty close to our current office space. And one interesting point that one of our team members made was that when you pull in one of the entrances, it says the Grove, and then it has a Roman numeral 5 beside it. And it's a good point that maybe not everyone knows their Roman numerals. So that could be a point of confusion, because we have a lot of meetings with all kinds of different people that come to our office. So that's just a little point of interest there. But plenty of parking. And another maybe area concern, the entry and exit could be a little challenging. It's at a busy intersection and kind of set back in a way that there are multiple ways in and out. So that's kind of the staff committee feedback from the Grove 5. I will turn it back over to Keith and Piers.
Thank you very much, Emily. If you can jump to the next slide, please. So now I'm going to jump into resource square 4. There are no Roman numerals here for this building. This is actually just a little bit north of the current location, so very, very close proximity to where employees and any visitors coming to the space are coming to currently. So from a location perspective, certainly a positive there. The building is owned by TerraCap, and there are multiple buildings under the same ownership group. They're all multi-story, very similar in size. This is actually one of the newer buildings, and has some more recent upgrades and structural components to it. I think jumping back up to the top here for the programming requirement, very similar programming to what we had previously. This one is 42 workstations. The Grove was 41. The Grove had 7 private offices, and this has 8. So really showing you that you're getting the same programming within the space, both spaces. The big difference here, again, just to re-emphasize, is that your training room is being put within the space and the square footage, which is shown sort of in the top right corner of this test fit plan. Now, again, we'll jump into it a little bit more later, but again, the key thing to note here is there is a resource amenity, which also has training rooms. So you're getting sort of two for one here as part of this space. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. But I think the one other thing to note for this particular space is that what we've done here is we've started on one end where the training room is, and we've worked our way around the building. And again, it shows you've got 3 sides of glass here, so good natural light. But once we've fitted in our programming requirement, we've been allowed to stop and draw a line. So that's just to show you sort of how efficient we've been. We haven't had to use an existing space and fit within it. We've taken exactly what we need, but there is also the option to expand a little bit to the north of the plan here. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a white blank space. So just something to note here that's a little bit different. Next slide, please. So again, similar condition to the space at the Grove, where it has the ceiling grid in place, lighting, HVAC, those sorts of things that we may be able to capitalize on from a construction cost perspective. And then again, big thing to note here is there's a little bit of furniture that's been left in the space, and we currently have them holding on to that and leaving it there in case we are able to use it. We haven't determined that yet, but it's at least an option at this point. Next slide, please. And this jumps into the amenities, which this really is brand new. It just opened this month, and our group, everyone on this call, or at least a group on this call, were the first people, the first visitors to have been through it. So it is truly brand new. The landlord has made a big investment in this space. I think that one of the positives here is that this is actually in the ground floor of your building. It is shared amongst the other buildings in the park, but just by nature of it being in your building, I think you'll be able to get a lot more use out of it than maybe some other buildings and tenants will be able to. Within it, there is, as Keith mentioned earlier, there is a food service. They have this seating area for people to come and have lunches at, meetings at, take phone calls at. You can see in the background of this photo, there's a brand new training room that accommodates about 50 people. And then also within this that is out of shot, there are 2 other smaller size conference rooms and a brand new gym with lockers and shower rooms as well. And this is all, an amenity to the tenants in the building in the park that comes, at no charge to you as a tenant in the building. And then next slide, please. And I believe I'm handing off.
Hi, I'm Latasha Walker, and I'm also with the staff committee. And like Emily, I'm going to kind of touch base on some of the positive points and some of the areas of concern or negotiation. This was kind of the wow factor of the viewings that we had. It's lots of windows. It's really nice space. Natural light is really good. The space is confined though. It's not as open as some departments feel like it is at our current space or would like for it to be. As you see, there is room for organizational growth on both sides. One, I think, is the reason is that some departments have vision for greater growth than others just because of funding and service provisions. So for an organization, for a department that offers a lot of services to the community and has funding that they can apply for and that may come up, they may feel like, hey, this is not a space that will allow us room for growth, while some of the smaller departments feel like this is adequate and conducive to our needs. It is reduced square footage compared to our current space, but the location is really good. Not too far from where we are, still close to restaurants. The traffic is not heavy, and all of us are familiar with that location. You've seen all the amenities. It's really nice. And one of the other negatives is that we would need to have our own conference room upstairs, and that detracts from the cubicle space. So there's a concern that if we had a conference room upstairs in our space, that it would just make it tighter for us as staff, and we'd be on top of one another. Other than that, you see the positive points are much greater than the areas of concern. But those are areas that we want to consider. I know some of us mentioned, just the difficulty of maybe navigating the facility once people or customers come in, just making sure they know which way to go and how to get where they need to be was an area of concern. Other than that, the space was, really nice to most of us. Thank you.
So here we have, again, we've still got 2 other locations that are kind of up in play right now. Your current location, we've kind of worked with our space planner and trying to figure out how we could upgrade your space if it makes more sense to stay where you are. There's some ADA improvements, lightings and thermostats, and just some things we've heard from the staff on how to improve it. So we've got that list. We're trying to put a plan and get some costs associated. We looked at the UEP location originally. They have come to us with a new option that they think that might work. We're putting together a plan to see what the square footage is, what the layout would be. And once we have that and fill that in, if it makes sense, we will present that to the group. Next slide.
Hey, Keith, before we get into the financials, maybe we can just pause to see if there are any questions from the board on the spaces themselves. So Kelly, can you back us up one slide? And just want to open it up for any questions or comments from the board on our options so far.
This is Christine Poinsett from Lincolnton. I had trouble getting on. I just wanted to let you know I'm here. I got on about quarter after. So I am here and present.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Any questions from any board members to Centralina staff or to Keith or Piers regarding the property?
This is Jarvis. I just one, and I they just addressed the no room for growth, and I think that is, and with both as far as the two new ones. The other thing is, looking over this, it appears that the conference room facilities don't seem to be the most as far as location and all that kind of stuff. If what I saw was correct, it says, okay, let's see. Like on the Grove, it says the large conference room first floor location is less convenient than if it was on the same floor as the office. And on the one we were just talking about, it says it needs to have our own conference room upstairs, detracts from the cubicle space. So it looks like having suitable conference rooms is an issue with the facilities that we're looking at. Am I off?
Thank you, Commissioner, for raising that. And I think just your first point on growth, I just wanted to address that, and we can talk about the conference room. So I think the growth question, and we'll be able to report back in September with some more numbers, but I had our HR manager pull some numbers.
Please mute. If you're online, please mute.
Pull some numbers about how many new positions we've created, and sort of what our workforce has looked like over the past 7 years. So she went back to the fiscal year starting July 1st, 2014, and looked forward for our current fiscal year. And what we actually found was, although we added new positions, we lost some positions, and there's been this kind of ebb and flow over the years of some growth, but some retraction, or depending upon our funding levels and our programming. So over 7 years, we've actually only gained a net one new position. So we've hovered around a workforce of between 40 and 45 for quite a long period of time. So I think while we are going to grow in certain areas, and we want to make sure we accommodate that growth, it's not always consistent year after year. So our current space programming does have a factor for growth, and we will have the ability to add new positions over time. The other thing too that we're weighing, and we'll have more information to share with the board in September, is the building utilization rate. So our current staff are encouraged to be out and about in the community, in the region. We have a new work from home policy that folks are taking advantage of. So it's not unlike some companies where every single employee is at their desk from 9 to 5 every day. We just don't have that type of workforce. So the utilization of the building, I think, is something we have to take into consideration. Just real quickly on the conference rooms, I think we have conference facilities in every space plan that's on par with what we have now in our current facility. So the space is accounted for. So that has not changed in every space. Obviously, there's going to be pros and cons. So I think some of the staff committee members and directors felt it was a pro to have the first floor conference space and separated from our office space. And some people thought it was a con. So I think it's just, there's a difference of opinion, and we'll have to work through those details, but we know that having adequate meeting facilities is a top priority for us.
Thank you.
Geraldine Keltzman Selberg. When do you think we'll see some of the data from the utilization report? And I ask that question because a lot of my professional customers are downsizing and actually going a lot to work from home as well as utilizing out in the field.
Absolutely. That's definitely the trend. You all just approved our work from home policy. And so staff and supervisors are working through those details. So I will definitely be presenting to you at the September meeting what the current utilization rate of the building is based on July 1st through September 1st. Any other questions? All right, let's dive into the meat.
I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Well, I guess for me, what's important is the recommendation from you guys as far as function and you know, what do you have to do to make the space you have work better? And then if you move, there's no use to do that if you're not improving the things you don't have where you are. So I guess for me, identifying better, and I don't think I missed anything in the previous presentation, but I guess I take to stock what your recommendations are. You guys are there, you're dealing with it. And so that's important for me, is what you think works and what would make it work where you are compared to where you want to go, or what options you have. So I'd like to hear a little more, either now or whenever you need to, of what makes the space work now, or do you take that off the table?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that's a really great point. And we can present, I think, a more holistic answer to that question with staff input at the September meeting. But I think one of the things that is top of mind for me in this space in particular, in our current location, is the difference between a professionally managed building and an owner-occupied building, which we're in now. And we spend, not myself, Denise, our finance director, Venetia, our HR and operations manager, we spend a lot of our time trying to get things done at this location that in a professionally managed building, I think would just come because that owner is investing in their asset. For example, we have to pay extra to have bathroom cleaning service 5 days a week, because in the original lease, when it was negotiated, it was only cleaning for 3 days a week. So we're paying out of pocket for that. And in all these buildings, bathroom cleaning is just something that's done for health and sanitation. So that's on my mind, is just the time that it could potentially free up, not having to chase down some of these maintenance and operational issues that we're spending our time on.
That's what's important to me, is if you added in those total costs, because that's something you don't add into maybe a square foot lease, is what are you spending money wise and time to do the things you wouldn't be doing there, and use your time better that we need you to be doing on duties. You know what I'm saying? So that's where I think your recommendations to us as to what works, what doesn't work, and why, and what's the cost of differences. And I think that helps us help you make a better decision.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely come back to you as part of the presentation in September with a full assessment of our current building, pro and con, and lining that up. Because I think the decision is, do we move or do we stay? And then if the decision is to move, this is the recommended place, and sort of weighing those two against each other.
Great job. Thank you.
And please keep in mind, one of the reasons that I think, Geraldine, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons for the move is also to lower the cost of what we're doing, which when we lower the cost, we obviously want the spaces to be adequate for the staff to be able to do their job to the best of their ability. But on the other side of that, if we can lower costs, we can better serve our members and possibly get them lower rates on what we're doing, which may make it more affordable to smaller communities to utilize a lot of the services we provide. So that's the flip in, and that's one of the reasons we're trying to just look at this move to see if it's better options, because right now, based on the lease right now, and these other ones, these are less expensive options. So, and they're pretty good alternatives so far. But anyway, now we're going into financial. So,
Well, before we
No,
move to
but
that,
I think all of that ties into what I'm saying is I think for me and the other board members can speak for themselves, but for me, I need to know what staff wants and what works for them and why they think it's better for us to make an objective decision, because we're not there every day. And so I think the committee decision and why plays a big part in my support one way or another. And I agree with everything you said financials to function to all of those things. So I just take more stock in what the staff would recommend and why, because they're the ones going to be there dealing with it day to day.
Commissioner have a very good point. Also, remember what our executive director said, we approved her work plan for the employees. You'll have some working from home, many work out in the field, and there's some that work here in the office. So we weigh that too. We're going to look at that as far as square footage. How much square footage we needed versus the number of employees that's in the building versus working from home or working in the field. So we have to weigh those factors also. Thank you, Commissioner Howell.
would any of our officers who were on the tour like to provide any observations about the spaces for their colleagues?
well, I mean, I think, I know our chair here and we both went on it, and we were very impressed with both locations, and a lot of the pros and cons from the staff. I think we looked at those and agree with a lot of them. I think that the second space, I saw less cons on it, and I totally agree with that. There are less cons on it. There is the one thing that Piers brought up. If you look at that map, there is room for growth because there's a whole part of the building that's not used yet, that we would have first right of refusal on if we needed it down in the future. So there is that option later on. If we don't need it, then we don't need to take it, but at least it's an option later on for growth. The other one, the first option, does not have that. But both were very, very impressive. They were, but yeah, what the staff wanted was my key considerations, and I asked them the entire time we were going around what they thought of the different spaces, and their pros and cons list doesn't surprise me. That's exactly, I was kind of thinking along the same lines of those as well. The second one we looked at had many less cons than the first one. And the amenities were amazing. Like the workout room and the other kind of a break room down there for them was definitely photo worthy. I wish we'd gotten pictures to show because it was really cool. It was awesome.
And I'd like to say that on the Cliff Cameron Drive, the Grove 5 was again my first time there. If I went a number of times, like Centralina staff will do to be easier, but to me it was difficulty in and out of the parking lot due to medians. We're looking at Harris Boulevard and Malvern Creek Road, I believe it was something like that. Anyway, 4-lane highways, medians in between. If I wanted to pull out and go to because I came by this building first to get to Cliff Cameron Drive, to come back in this direction, I had to go up to the intersection, make a U-turn and come back. And that's not going to kill anybody, but it's just not, for some, they have a meeting lined up with someone and never been in that building before. It may be a little difficult getting in and out of there. So that's just one of the things I noticed. And it was just already stated the pros and con list on building 2, which is right up the road here on David Taylor Drive. The cons list is much smaller, and they're both beautiful facilities. It's just easier access, I thought, on the David Taylor address versus the Cliff Cameron address. Thank you.
So this is Mayor Alexander, and I do have a couple of questions. In regard to the existing location, has a pros and cons been done of that space? And also, anytime that you're comparing sort of an upfitted and new fresh building versus what is there right now, is there any consideration in taking smaller space and having that space upfitted? And would that make any difference in how much you like one of the other buildings that you looked at? Because both of those buildings have been upfitted, although they're, 20 years old, one of them, I think, or a couple of them. So, your existing building is also much older, but if you spent money there and reduced your square footage, if that's an option, could that space, I'd like to see the comparison there.
Yeah, those are really great points, and I appreciate that. We do have a list of concerns of our current building that we received input from staff on, and in our current space, part of our proposal and negotiations with our landlord is for them to make improvements in our current space, such as new carpeting, new lighting. We have asked for access card readers on the side doors. So we are asking them to make a capital investment in the space that would be comparable to what the other buildings would make as well. So the upfit will be consistent. We're not, looking at really fancy finishes or anything. This is all
Right.
basic stuff. But if we stay here, the quality of this space must improve.
Right.
Because
It's tired, very tired.
And yes, so we will definitely be factoring that into the project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Alexander. And I want to add one more thing. I know Keith has been in with the moves for Centralina for over quite some time. And I do remember the Baxter Street location, which was a hole in the wall. And then I was visiting there once or twice. And then I was at the North Tryon Street on the 12th floor. As I go in there, so much empty space. And I'm thinking, why did they need all this? I mean, it was beautiful, but I always ask that to myself. Now I walk in this building here on David Taylor, where we are currently. I walk in, and I don't see as much empty space. I see more usable space here, but I still see a lot of empty cubicles where folks are working from home or working out in the field. So that just goes back to my previous point as to the work schedule that we approved as an executive board. And looking back at that, and as Commissioner House said, working with staff, with our executive director and staff on what suits them the best and what it's going to come down to before we get to financials. Thank you.
Geraldine, one last question.
Chambers.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
This is Dolores Chambers.
Yes, Dolores.
From the town of Dayton. I agree with what I have heard as far as moving to a new location. I'm sure you have weighed out the pros and cons. So whatever that will be feasible for the staff, to get another position, whatever is workable for you, I think that's what you should do.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chambers. We appreciate that.
Thank you for your input.
Yeah, one last question, Councilman Silver.
Yes,
has any consideration been taken for IT and the needs of IT and being able to stream from these other locations?
Absolutely. We have had trouble in this building with Wi-Fi access points, and we recently changed our internet service provider and upped our bandwidth. So it's absolutely essential that our staff have access and good speed. We will be working with our current IT managed service provider to do an assessment of the candidate spaces to make sure that, one, we can carry over our current internet service provider or see what they have available, and then to see if they, identify any, trouble spots or issues with the buildings. So that will be, again, another point of input as in our September presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was a great question. Thank you, because critical things like that we may not think of at the time. Now, staff will end up bringing it up, thinking about it in their internal meetings. As far as what we're concerned, Troy, I'm glad you asked that. That was a great time to bring that up. Thank you.
Great. Well, we'll have some more time for questions, but I want to make sure Keith can walk you all through the current financial information that we have right now. And I know he'll caveat this, but I'll say it as well. This is where we are currently in negotiations. So there's lots of things that could change between now and September. So I'll just want to put that out there, but I'll turn it over to Keith, who can share with you the details.
And
or Piers, sorry.
I'm going to jump in and take it over. I'll get myself off mute. Okay, yeah, so exactly, Geraldine. This is where we currently stand in the process, and we are still continuing to work through this and improve this. I'll work down kind of row by row and talk you through some of the key points here. There's obviously a fair bit of information. So the RSF, that's the rentable square footage number. That's the size of the space in each building that we're looking at. And again, as we've touched on here previously, the big point to notice is that we believe and have found that there are efficiencies by looking at other buildings where we may be able to get a smaller square footage and therefore save on rent costs. And again, Keith touched on this earlier, but one of the biggest factors, the biggest factor when looking at your total rent spend on a monthly basis is the square footage over the rental rate. And that's reflected here. You can see that despite having the lowest rate at your current location, it's actually the most expensive on a monthly rental basis. So that's just something that we've been working through here. On line item 2, the lease term, that's the length of lease. And we've asked for a 5-year proposal at the current location. They would offer more lease term if that's what we needed. But the big thing with lease term, that's how we drive the deal terms, the economics of the deal. So your rental rate, your escalations, your free rent, your construction allowances, that all really hinges on the length of lease term. And that's why we're looking at a slightly longer lease term on these other 2 buildings, where we're going to have to do a more substantial construction build out. And the goal here is to get to a construction allowance number that covers your hard cost of construction to minimize your out-of-pocket expenses. So you'll notice that there's a slight variation in the years, 7.5 years to 7.58 years. The market normal, though it's called free rent, it's really rental abatement. So if you get 3 months at the front of the lease term, then you also add it onto the back, and that's why it explains that slight variation in total lease term. The effective rental rates obviously speak for themselves, and you can see how those shake out, and likewise with the monthly costs. One of the other benefits of going for the 7-year over the 5-year term is that you tend to be offered a lower annual escalation on that rate. And that again here is reflected in Resource 4 in the Grove, where you have a 2.75% annual escalation versus the 3% on a 5-year for your current location. And again, these are market standards that we would see across the Charlotte market for annual escalations. The big thing to note on the free rent is that for looking at the Grove, they have offered to structure it whereby you get 1 month of free rent applied to your rent at the start of each lease year. So a total of 7, but spread out over the lease term. That is not typical for the market. What is typical is to have the free rent applied at the beginning of the lease term to help you with the cost of moving, etc. And that's what's being offered at Resource Square 4, where you get 6 months of free rent, but you take it all at the start. And then again, as you can see in the details here, both of them have offered some optionality to how you use that free rent. So for Resource Square, you can convert 50% of the value of that free rent and contribute it towards your construction costs. So again, the thinking there is, how do we make sure that we're not coming out of pocket for our hard construction costs? And then looking at the Grove, they've actually got to a point where and we'll see this a little bit later on, but their allowance is already covering what we believe to be an estimate on the hard construction costs. So they have said we can apply the value of 50% of the free rent towards our FF&E, which is your furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So for example, your desks and your cubicles and things like that, which does not typically fall under the umbrella of construction allowances and tenant improvement allowance. So that's just a little incentive that they've offered us there. Again, the next ones sort of speak for themselves here. We haven't got to the point of sharing financials yet for any of these, so they may change. The renewal options, we've been offered at all of them, which just gives us the right to stay in there for another 5 years. Again, we have been offered rights of first refusal. As we know, we're first in line on the resource square. We have that space that's available immediately next to us that we know of. The Grove is offering the right of first refusal. However, the space is currently occupied, so it would be subject to when that tenant moves. And then beneficial occupancy. This essentially allows you to occupy the space as soon as construction is completed, in the event that we complete construction prior to the date that the lease is due to commence. So you can move in and use the space without triggering the lease commencement at no cost if construction is completed in advance. Next slide, please. So this really focuses in on the construction piece that we were talking about a little bit here. And for the current location, as we've talked about, we are working through that at the moment, so we don't have numbers to use, but we are working on getting those. For Resource Square 4, you can see we've got a preliminary construction budget of about $52.95 per square foot. The allowance that the landlord is offering is $48 a square foot. So, I think the takeaway here is that we're close. And again, hopefully, as we continue these negotiations, we'll be able to improve it and get to a point where, we're not coming out of pocket for construction costs. There are project management fees. These are for the landlord who will be overseeing construction, for them to have project managers on site and make sure that things stick to schedule and budget, etc. For the Grove, you can see that we've actually got to a point where we have covered the initial hard cost of construction, which is a positive. And again, the goal here will be to improve it and make sure that we can use the economics to be applied elsewhere for other costs like furniture that will come up during this move process. And then the next few line items, they just break this out at a total cost value instead of using the per square foot amount. Just for further detail. And again, the financial incentives we've talked about here, which is the ability to use some of your free rent to make sure that you are covering the cost of construction. And then the penultimate line item here, the landlord offers you the option, if we don't get to a solution where the offered allowance covers the cost of construction, they will essentially loan you whatever that difference is and put that into your rental rate. So essentially what that does is it helps you not take out a loan from a bank and you're able to package it up into your monthly rent over the course of the 7-year lease to prevent having that capital expenditure up front. And again, on the right-hand side here for the Grove, we talked about it, but they are offering the ability to convert your free rent to the value of about $85,000 to be used towards furniture. I believe that concludes the financials, and I'll hand it back to Geraldine.
Thank you, Pierce. And just a quick note on a clarification on the furniture. So the majority of the furniture at our current location, with the exception of the cubicles on the aging side of the building, and a few pieces of the office furniture, is the property of our current landlord. So if we do move, we would need to buy new furniture. So the incentive of offering some FF&E in the Grove or using the available furniture a resource square will help us incredibly with the cost of furniture, which I've learned is frightfully expensive. So that includes our slides. Happy to answer any questions that the board has on the financials.
Any questions on what you just heard from Pierce or Geraldine? Any comments, any questions or concerns? Again, we're getting just information only tonight. More information will be forthcoming and before our September meeting.
It's not really a question as much as it is a statement, Councilman Selbert here. Obviously, the amount of money we're talking about on upfits, is there any way that we can roll this into some type of grant or some types of funding that's available out there somewhere?
Well, I think if there were, we would be in a long line behind a lot of organizations. But I will give a think on that, council member, and see what I can come up with.
I will guarantee that this lady sitting right here, she's going to try to find every opening or loophole or anything she can to try to narrow the cost down, whatever it may be, furniture or anything else.
So this is Mayor Alexander. One of the things that I think is interesting about this proposal is if you compare the savings that you would get by going into smaller space from the first one over 7 years, you know, you have a sizable amount of savings there to help offset some of it, the cost of either furniture or upfit. Because in terms of the rent rate.
The other piece of the financial puzzle that's not represented yet is the cost of physically moving. So that also will need to be considered, and based on what we saw in 2017, that was approximately $70,000 in moving expenses. So that's also something that we will present to you and you'll take into consideration as part of that complete cost that I talked about.
Thank you, Mayor. Any further comments or questions for our Executive Director or Centralina staff who are still with us, or our Cushman & Wakefield consultants who are still with us? No.
If I could ask just one last question of the group, you've all provided some great feedback of things that you'd like to hear more about and other data points that will be helpful in your decision making. Is there anything that we haven't covered in terms of information that you'd like to see in the September presentation that our team can take note of in our preparations?
It was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. Very comprehensive.
Thank you.
Yes, it was. I guess the only thing, just to reiterate what's already been said, is that, you know, I think we as executive board, we want to do whatever the executive director and the staff feels best with. So when during the present September, we'd like very much to hear your preference out of this.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think having happy employees makes very productive employees. So we get more and we do more for our communities.
Mayor, you're absolutely correct. So I'm sure that will be taken into consideration. Thank you, Commissioner Woodburn. Okay, that's going to conclude our presentation from Cushman & Wakefield. We thank Keith and Pierce for joining us and providing their input and expertise in this subject. One more time, any further comments from the executive board or Centralina staff that are still with us? Any further comments? Hearing none, any comments from the executive director other than what she's already stated?
None. Thank you for your time tonight.
Okay. And thank you. Our final comments will be, as a reminder, our next meeting will be the Board of Delegates meeting in 2 weeks. It'll be on Wednesday, August the 11th at 5 o'clock, August the 11th at 5. The meeting will be our first meeting using a hybrid form, both in person and virtual. This will allow for maximum distancing in the conference room, that we are limiting people in person. So this is important for planning purposes. Please RSVP by August the 6th, no later than August the 6th, and let Kelly Weston know if you're planning to attend virtually or in person. She'll limit the in-person people for the meeting. So let her know. If you don't hear from you by August the 6th, then we assume you're going to be virtual. If not, you join us in person. Please let Kelly know by August the 6th. With no further questions or comments, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.